Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we are with EJ Magnier. In fact, the last time EJ and I met in person was in Caracas, Venezuela. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're with the legendary reporter and journalist, international journalist, EJ Magnier. And make sure you check out his website. I'll bring it up before we go so you can see it. Absolutely outstanding work that he does. I've known him for years, a wonderful person. And the last time we got together in person, the legendary. Sorry about that. There we go. The last time we met was in person, was in Caracas, Venezuela. We were both covering the election there. Very interesting. And now we're in a very different world. EJ, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Garland.
I'm going to connect something that a lot of people haven't connected, and you give me a thought. Kaya Kallas and crew recently took an action against Jacques Beau that I saw as completely over the top. I saw it as reckless and a complete disregard for all legal norms. And when I saw what happened in Venezuela, the two just jumped out at me. It seemed to me the same type of action. I'm just to throw that to you and tell me what you think.
Well, it's all related exactly to what Rex Tillerson was confronted when he was a Secretary of State with the memo that Politico published that we actually use democracy and human rights and freedom of expression and all that only against our adversary, but not against our friends and allies. This is exactly the same as what Europe is doing today, is where the United States had more guts to say, well, I don't care really about democracy or human rights. I do whatever I want, and this is my law, and the United Nations or international laws don't exist for me. However, in Europe, it's completely different. Still, our leaders are talking about international laws, values, human rights, democracy, which is completely translated, if we look at their action, into two words: double standards and hypocrisy. That is the answer to your questions. When it is related to a friend of Europe or the United States or any other country that Europe has interest with, then the Europeans don't have an answer for that. European officials or bureaucrats, they need to look into it and they come back to us to answer the question, but they never do because actually they know they can't face the reality and just say it out loud. Fortunately, there are still countries like Spain who can really say things as they are in relation to what's happening in Israel and the genocide against the Palestinians, or, for example, the abduction of the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. However, in Brussels, we've lost that.
Yes, and just as an example, the law, the international courts, the international bodies that attempt to bring charges against leaders of Israel, the law is very, very clear and it's very obvious. And really, rather than just go to court, to an international court and fight the law, they go after the members of the court and literally sanction the members of the court rather than allow them to simply do their judicial duties. Kaya Kallas and company, when it comes to Jacques Beau, you look at it and I read it and they said, well, this is not a punishment, but my background is in legal issues. You read the definition of punishment in any law dictionary, and that action meets all of the standards, every single standard clearly for punishment, but they just write, it's not punishment. And they don't allow any venue. They don't allow anywhere for Jacques Beau. It's not a legal action, so you can't go to court. So they try to stop him from doing it. You look at the Maduro case. They say, okay, he's a drug dealer. We're bringing him in because he's a drug dealer, which they don't have jurisdiction. As soon as they bring him in, they say, yeah, I guess we'll drop the drug dealer charges because they don't make any sense. And so you see this a complete, not just a disregard for international law, not just a disregard for law, but a willingness to even manipulate what they're doing from a legal perspective, so that if there is a law, it doesn't apply. If you make an assertion of a legal violation, once you get the guy in, you just drop it or whatever, or you just say, well, okay, we're going to say it's not legal, so you can't go to court because we'll call it a corrective action.
Well, few of the 27 European leaders identified their behavior with one word: realpolitik. So the reality imposed a certain policy on European leaders to disregard international laws or the same value that Europe is voicing all the time. Therefore, when we find a definition for everything, we fall back into George Orwell, who introduced really this concept that most leaders are using. For example, when killing civilians, it's a collateral damage. When aggression, when starting a war against another country, a sovereign country, they call it a right of self-defense. So these are the terminology that politicians find to justify their action, and they just need to repeat the same lie over and over again to divide the population and find those who will actually walk along and justify the action when it suits them. Therefore, unfortunately, I would like to say something here that I am extremely disappointed, because now we live in a lawless world. There's no law anymore. We don't know what is applicable, what is not applicable. We know it is applicable whenever the country use. At least Donald Trump is honest when he say, okay, I want to steal the oil. And he goes and steal the oil. We understand he told us that, and that's it. He doesn't need to go around it. It is not justifying what he's doing because he's saying it, but he is violating international laws and is not hiding behind it.
The other thing I think that people have to look at, there are people that are surprised by this or shocked by that. And I have to say this position. I watched a genocide. I watched the slaughter. I watched innocent men, women, and children, civilians murdered for the last 2 years. At this point, when I see the level of brutality and the defense of this and the actions taken against, I see an old 80-some-year-old person holding up a sign in Britain, and they're arresting an older person, a senior who's in a wheelchair, who has severe physical problems, for holding up a sign, because this person is opposing an unthinkable act that is supported by their government. To me, I can't understand why anyone would be surprised after seeing such egregious acts. There's no reason to be surprised anymore.
Well, people don't go into details, but you mentioned the UK, for example. A Palestinian doctor was arrested. She's a female practicing, was stopped from practicing her profession and was arrested because she's anti-Semite. I mean, how can you tell a Palestinian to be anti-Semite when a Palestinian is a Semite? So the level of ignorance is reaching such a level where the opposition to Israel genocide is identified by so many definitions. In some countries is against the law, which leaders are using just to put people in jail because they oppose the policy of the government. So actually, we don't have anymore a freedom of expression. We don't have the freedom to say things as they are and accept that people can disagree with us and we disagree with them and we criticize their policy, which is something that is available for everybody in a democratic state. However, we call ourselves living in a democratic continent, but all the measures like debunking and re-debunking and pre-debunking. So before you say something, they shut your mouth because maybe you're going to say something that doesn't fit with what they consider is a reality. Well, this is a dictatorship, and we live in a state of dictatorship, but we don't have the courage to say it as it is.
One of the things that I did want to introduce people to, for those who don't know, I always like to introduce people to the various places that I go online for information. One of them is ejmagnier.com. You'll notice that a lot of people that I bring on, such as Larry Johnson and various people, have websites. And what I do is a lot of these sites, so this is where I get my info. This is where I learn from. Iran, there's a numerous EJ Magnier, Magnier.com. Absolutely outstanding. It's these things in French and English and various languages. And here's an article: Iran and the politics of delegitimization, why protest becomes a strategic weapon. One of the main reasons I bring that up right now is in the United States, the United States government, the Trump administration, has decided to put immigration officers on the streets to wander around. By law, they can do that. I'm not in favor. I'm very concerned. I'm very, concerned about government overreach. That's one of my considerations. I certainly align with I'm not a, what do they call it? I forgot the group, but bottom line is I align with groups who are concerned with government overreach. But here's my point. I watched a video recently. A young woman was in her vehicle and she was trying to drive away from some of these officers. They shot her in the head like 3 times. And when you look at the video, I'm a retired police officer. Trust me, I taught this stuff in the academy. I ran a police academy in the United States, right? And she was trying to drive away and they shot her. Now, Donald Trump is saying if the Iranians shoot protesters, which a former CIA officer, Mike Pompeo, has already admitted that the Mossad is behind these protests, is involved in these protests. So an outside entities which are violently opposed to the government of Iran are helping and sponsoring and using these protests, though some of them may be legitimate there as a result of the sanctions. But here's my point. As U.S. government shoots protesters, as you say, protest is a strategic weapon against Iran. Your article, Iran and the Politics of Delegitimization, Why Protest Becomes a Strategic Weapon. EJ.
Well, I wanted to say in this article that Western states who claim to have certain values, they are arresting protesters, like in Germany, like in France, like in the UK. And that is a selective application shaped by strategic interest. When they do that, they find a justification. I remember even the UK Prime Minister in 2010, he said he will block all social medias during protesters against the policy of his government. So everything is possible and everything is justified. And again, what is not justified is for the non-friends of the Western club. This is what was the article about. But I would like to go back a little bit, if I may, about what's happening in Venezuela, because people, as you rightly mentioned, it is not a drug cartel, it's something else. It's about the oil. But what people, in my opinion, need to understand, it is more than only the title of oil. It is not the oil of Venezuela. It is Venezuela selling the oil by not using the dollar. And when any oil producer country is selling the oil using yuan or rupee to the Indian, or a ruble to the Russian or to the Chinese, it means they no longer using the dollar as a currency of exchange. That is something that the Americans consider really part of their national security, because it disturbs indeed the national security. America can no longer maintain 800 military bases around the world if the dollar is dethroned. If Venezuela, and Venezuela has started since the sanctions, but also Saudi Arabia also started to sell part of its oil to China, and Iraq started to sell part of its oil to China also, not in a dollar. This is where the Americans get really upset and they are ready to invade the country or do something to disrupt that, because bringing down the dollar from its throne, it means the end of the US hegemony, because the US prints money and doesn't have a backup in gold, and countries buy bonds to compensate the use of dollars when they sell the oil. This is when we say it is about the oil, is not only to control the oil of Venezuela, but to control the selling of the oil of Venezuela also in US dollars, because Venezuela stopped using the dollar and selling it or giving it to the United States for a certain price because of the US sanctions. So the US imposed sanctions on Venezuela, imposed sanctions on its refineries. 6 refineries were completely blocked. This is why the richest country in the world in terms of quantity of oil became poor, because it's not capable of extracting this oil, refine it, and selling it. That is the key.
Well, and as if you look into the excuses that, in my opinion, the excuses are deliberate lies to the American people. This is weapons of mass destruction part two. It was there's drugs sales something or other, but that sales, but that is kind of evaporated, and they've kind of admitted that the foundation of that was a lie. It was Maduro has jailed opposition figures. However, the opposition figures that he has either thrown out of the country and jailed are people that work for the United States. They were paid by the CIA, and they literally did things that would get you arrested in any country. The people that literally called for the violent overthrow of their own government, if you do that in the United States or any legitimate government, you will be arrested. That's not acceptable in any country. Certainly, you and I both observed I observed the elections. You observed the elections. What I saw, to be quite frank, I observed the elections in the United States. They seemed a lot clearer to me. And might I add, they aligned with the polls. So if the polls say the Maduro's party is going to win by 63%, which is often somewhere, and then he wins by 63, and the exit polls say he'll win by 63%, and then he wins by 63%. In Russia, the polls said that Vladimir Putin was going to, American sponsored polls said Vladimir Putin's going to win by, has 86% support. He got 87. And then they said he stole it, which I guess he stole an extra 1%. My point being, it goes back to the Rex Tillerson memo that you said, that all of these things are lies, but lies for the American people. The lies to say to the American people, this is weapons of mass destruction. This is babies being thrown out of incubators. This is shut up, American people. We'll give you any kind of fake fraud lie. You accept that, because we can't really tell you the reason we're doing it, because that probably wouldn't go over too well.
Well, I invite the audience to Google the 60-minute interview, which is, it lasts 14 plus minutes, on the CIA drugs and the CIA drugs in Venezuela, how the CIA mounted the whole operation by bringing over 1 ton of narcotic into Venezuela and ship it to the United States to distribute it in the street. And the CIA allowed that to happen despite the rejection of the DEA. That is what, when the President Donald Trump started to talk about cartel del Sol, or of the sun, and the cartel of the sun, he meant exactly this. And that program, it was very, very well documented with CIA officers, with DEA officer, with the prosecutor of the DEA, stating facts about this shipment that the CIA brought into the United States and allowed the distribution to the Americans where people die from it. This is why the Americans withdrew the accusation of narcotic dealer from Maduro. And by the way, they took his wife, and I read today in the New York Times, the wife said, well, if you're going to take my husband, then take me too. And they took her. Under which jurisdiction? What is the law to take another person with you and to take it from Venezuela because she is a wife of a president and put her in front of a judge in New York? I mean, it's this administration is permitting itself to do anything.
And I saw her with big bruises on her face. And so it appears that they were kidnapped, they were beaten. It certainly appears that they were kidnapped and beaten. A person, I put it like this again, I was a police officer. And if a person was accused of, I don't know, whatever, murder, and I went in and we arrested him, legitimate arrest. And his wife said, well, if you're going to arrest my husband, arrest me too. We would have to say, ma'am, we have no warrant for your arrest. We have no criminal charges against you. I understand your solidarity with your husband. You can come down and visit him. You can do everything that the law allows, but we're unable to arrest you. We can't arrest a person that's not accused of a crime. Might I add, the crime is possessing a machine gun in his own country, but notwithstanding the absurdity of this crime, you can't just arrest a person because they say, hey, arrest me. That's not probable cause for arrest. But as preposterous as the entire argument that the U.S. has jurisdiction, extraterritorial jurisdiction, Julian Assange-esque jurisdiction, then they might as well. At this point, what difference does it make?
Well, we don't live under a state of law anyway. If the United States is saying we do not abide by the UN or international laws, then there are no laws. So the Americans can say, well, why should I work? I can go and rob a bank and take the money because there is no law that can stop me anywhere outside the United States. Is this the message that the Americans are telling the rest of the world, that they can really do whatever they want and get away with it? I mean, the sentiment that is growing and building up against America is overwhelming today, and in particular in Europe, when it is ending with the forcible buying of Greenland. And because America said, I want it, because Truman said in 1940s that he would like to buy it, and then Greenland said no, Donald Trump wants it today. So yeah, everything is out for grab, and he can take really anything.
Right. And let me just show you something as far as the United States being so concerned about drugs and purchase. And that is, oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry about that. What I wanted to show people was this. 2 articles. Number 1, XX, you notice they say X CIA airline tagged the cocaine. So that was Southern Air Transport, Southern airplane allegedly used in deal for weapons, right? If you, okay, so fine. So they're saying Southern Air Transport. There was in fact a movie made called, what was it? Air America or something. But if you start looking again, you find something else. There's any other places you can find Epstein, the Midas touch. There's so many places you can look. This was about Mike, but this was a thing by Mike Benz. But here's the thing, and this is related. The USA used Southern Air Transport, the CIA, to run drugs out of, and it was also used for the Iran-Contra weapons deals, right? And what happened to Southern Air Transport? Jeffrey Epstein bought it. So Southern Air Transport is used by the CIA to run drugs. And then Jeffrey Epstein comes in and buys Southern Air Transport and moves it from Miami to Ohio. And then Lex Westerner starts using it. You see what I mean? So the whole concept of the U.S. being opposed to drugs, well, there's the Taliban was opposed to the drug industry. The United States comes into Afghanistan, the drug industry goes through the roof. The Vietnam War, drug heroin starts coming in from the Golden Triangle there. Heroin in the poor Black communities and the poor communities in the United States goes through the roof. All of these people die of overboard. So if you look at the U.S. government, We could go back to the Opium Wars with the British. The British, these empires have always made a fortune on drugs. And how ironic it is that the US should say we're going after the leader of another country for a concocted story about drugs when the history of the US as a drug dealer and the Brits of a drug dealer is easily accessible in seconds online.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, we kind of repeating the same thing. When the Americans want to do something, they sugarcoat the reason of their action, and then they present it to the world as it is necessary for the national security. They can change their mind, like George Bush when he went to Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction, and he said, "Oh, we couldn't find anything. Then we import democracy." So it's never happened in this way because the Americans are really careless about democracy because the best friend of the West are not democratic countries in the Middle East. They are the oil-rich Gulf countries, and they don't have a democratic system. And the West is fine with these countries and with these leaders. So it is never about what they present to us. It's always another agenda. It is about the oil, it is about the hegemony, it's about the control of the country, it's about submitting and forcing a country on its knees, impoverishing people. And then we have the guts to come out and say, like in the case of Iran, you mentioned earlier on, that we care about the Iranian people. We've been starving the Iranian people since 1979 or 1980. That was the first sanctions imposed by Jimmy Carter. And then Donald Trump imposed the maximum pressure, and people are on their knee because of these sanctions. And then we say we care about this population. We don't. We say we support a self-determination of any people. We do that with Kosovo, and then we don't need a vote in Kosovo to recognize Kosovo. But we deny that on the Palestinian people, and we say, no, they don't have the right of self-determination because of our relationship with Israel. So that is a continuous double standard everywhere. Frankly, politics had become utterly disgusting.
One of the interesting things about the Iran dynamics is how closely it is aligned with what happened in Venezuela. The United States overthrew the government of Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. There's a book about it, if anyone wonders, called All the Shah's Men. I have it around here somewhere that talks about how it happened. And what did they do? They went in, they overthrew the government when a duly democratically elected leader came in who said, we're going to nationalize our oil and use it for ourselves. The oil was being sold by the British and the Americans, and they were making a fortune, and the Iranians were impoverished, and they said, we want to keep our oil. They overthrew him and put in a brutal dictator. The Iranians were, revolution overthrew it. Similar, exact same thing happened in Venezuela. And ever since, the US has been trying, and the Brits have been trying to get and steal their oil back. It's the exact same dynamics in Iran, if you ask me.
Oh, yeah. And Iran today, uh, despite the war that was waged from the Israeli and the United States, is asked not to produce missiles for its own protection. It is a clear menace from the United States saying to Iran, if you regain the production of your missiles, Iran never wage a war against any country, its neighbors or any other country. Israel started the first time bombing the Iranian consulate in Syria, and then Israel took the initiative to start bombing a sovereign country under the pretext of prevention. So the Israeli used this word that we're going to bomb Iran because one day Iran is going to bomb us. So that is the excuse. They use it under Article 51 of the United Nations, calling upon a self-defense. So Iran today is said you cannot produce any nuclear substance domestically, even the one civilian, which is against the law, because as Iran is part of the NTP, it has the right to produce a nuclear enrichment uranium, to a certain level and certain degree. Now, no one today said Iran has reached a military degree, but Benjamin Netanyahu saying for the last 15 years, Iran is only a couple of weeks away from a nuclear bomb. And we've never seen this nuclear bomb. On the contrary, despite the bombardment of Iran and the heavy damage that was caused on Iran, the Tehran is still saying, I do not produce nuclear bomb for a very simple reason. Russia has thousands of nuclear bombs and is not using them in its war against Ukraine. Using nuclear bomb is not really something that leaders can take as an option, at the exception of the United States, because that was the only country in the world that used it twice against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Therefore, what the Americans are doing today is telling us that they can use any possible means to impose their hegemony when they consider it suitable. So against Iran, yes, the Americans say we have the right to go and bomb the Iranian nuclear program, and Israel said we have the right to go and bomb the missile program. Who gave them this right? Themselves.
Additionally, your thoughts on the role of these peripheral conflicts, I'll call them, on the U.S.'s ultimate great power conflict, their aim at China. One of the things that the United States government has said to the Venezuelan government, which I would add, I think people are misled. I think people truly believe that after President Maduro was kidnapped, that the United States has taken full control of the Caracas government, which they have not. But they're demanding that the Venezuelans stop doing business with Russia and China, and that everyone in the region stop doing business with Russia and China. And they're talking about Iran selling oil and doing business with Russia and China. Your thoughts on the dynamic in which this is the U.S.'s great power conflict and its absurd and preposterous plans to dominate the planet by stopping the rise of these other great powers, which have already risen, I might add.
Well, if we hear what the new president ad interim is saying, she has responded to what Trump asked to cut all relationship and ties with Russia, Iran, and China. And she says, we have good relationship with everybody on the planet, and we have the intention to maintain that, including the United States. Now, the irony is the United States abducted Maduro, President Nicolas Maduro, but left in place the entire Bolivarian system, the government, the vice prime minister, the parliament, everybody, the minister of defense, the interior minister, the militia, they all still in place. They all still running the country. And Trump said, we have no intention to overpower this government because the Americans actually don't have an alternative and they don't have a plan of a coup d'etat and bring somebody else, because all the pro-Americans, as Trump said, lack respect and authority in Venezuela. But on top of that, the leader of the Venezuelan opposition is standing today still against Maduro, but against the United States and the way the Americans abducted the president, because this is not what the Venezuela is used to, and this is not the constitution of Venezuela. Therefore, the whole system is still in place, and removing a person because he was accused of being a drug dealer, and then saying, well, actually, he's not. He possessed machine guns that every single president on earth, make me laugh when I say machine gun, because, I mean, accusing a president of having machine guns in the country, what do you want people to have a stick and a stone? Every country has machine guns. And then saying that it is about the oil. Well, Venezuela, since 2019, is asking the Americans to come and reactivate all the American companies to reproduce the oil so we can see how Venezuela and the Americans are benefiting from these natural resources. And the Americans refused. And Maduro, just 48 hours before his abduction, called upon the United States to come and invest in the country and reactivated the oil companies and the oil production. And America refused. Now, abducting a president just for his persona is really weird because we don't understand where the Americans want to go. Now, Trump is claiming victories and credit over the relationship with Venezuela when Venezuela took the initiative before the abduction and say, we want to reestablish a relationship with Americans and come and let us reorganize our economic and political relationship. So it is Trump that is still imposing sanctions on the oil in Venezuela. It is Trump that's still imposing the sanction on navy or tankers to come to Venezuela and carry oil. He's still starving Venezuela and then accusing Maduro of starving his people. If you do not allow Venezuela, that the only production they have mainly is oil and gold, but oil is not allowed to sell it outside the country, and then you say Venezuela is starving its own people, it doesn't fit. It is not compatible with the reality. And anyone with a very little sense of logic would say, okay, well, you are imposing, you're strangling Venezuela and saying, why you're not rich? But you're not rich because I'm strangling you. You can't breathe. And this is what's happening today. So the more credit Donald Trump comes out to claim is not true because Venezuela is indeed offering and repeating the same offer over and over again. And the last one was yesterday, last night, by the current president saying, come, let us do business together.
Here's what's interesting. Two contradictions. The United States government says, okay, President Maduro is sitting on trillions of dollars of oil, trillions of dollars on oil, but instead he decided to sell drugs to make money. I mean, I got trillions of dollars of oil. I don't need to sell drugs. Oil is better than drugs. I can get rich. Let me just add this. He called and tried to make deals to make money. If he wanted to personally enrich himself, if he called ConocoPhillips and Exxon tomorrow and said, tell you what, slip me $1 billion each, I'll give you the oil, they'd have bribed him. Look what they've done all over Africa and Nigeria with the bribes, right? So I'm to believe that he's sitting on trillions of dollars of oil, but rather than make money on the oil, he decided to sell drugs. Number two, you say the election is illegal. Corina Machado, whatever her name is, she would have won. She should have won. She's the legitimate president. The elections were absurd and ridiculous. And then they say, well, put her in. And nobody knows who she is. She has no respect. But you just told me she would have won the election. How would she have won the election when you say she can't be in charge of the because the people here don't respect her. She has no legitimacy. But if she'd have ran, she'd have won. These absurd contradictions.
Well, Donald Trump is someone you cannot take his word seriously because he's not a politician and he doesn't understand what's happening around the world. He understands business. He knows how to use power and business. So why he went to abduct Nicolas Maduro? The United States is the strongest military, has the strongest military power in the world. This military power was available to every single president, but not every single president decided to violate international law to this point and extend this violation until abducting a sitting legally and democratically elected president. So showing off with the power that the whole world knows that you have, it is not really a credit when an adult can beat up a 5-year-old child. It's something it's so natural and so normal to know who is going to win at the end of the day. So the power that United States has, instead of using it to develop alliances, to impose international law on the rest of the world, to make sure that every country is respecting international law, this is not happening. Instead, the Americans are saying we want to take anything we want. And if Maduro is sitting on trillions of dollars of oil that he is not able to sell it because we are imposing sanctions, so we abduct him, and then the whole system is still in place, and we go to the vice president, who is now, she is now acting as an interim president, and ask her to give us the oil that Maduro was ready to give and make business with America. But Trump is thinking that he can prevent Venezuela from selling oil to anyone else because he wants the exclusivity. Well, of course, Venezuela, like Iran, two countries under heavy sanctions, are selling the oil cheaper than the market price. This is not something that Trump can stomach. And this is why his business side comes into play, mixed with the almighty military power of the United States, saying this is not possible. We take the oil, we sell it, and we benefit from it. Well, if you want to take it at a discount price, you just don't need to abduct the president. You just go and say to the presidents, okay, I send my oil companies back, and they will make profit exactly the same as Venezuela is selling to anyone. Sit around the table and negotiate. But showing that you can send 150 plane, well, give 150 plane to any country, and they can go and abduct any president. This is not the power. Power is when you have it and you don't need to use it, but people understand you have it and you use it adequately and you use it intelligently, which I think two things that Trump is lacking.
Yes, I've always said power is only power until you use it. Then it becomes force, and force is unpredictable. Let me ask you this. Back in Europe for a moment, the Europeans are now saying, oh, we'll send troops. Now, they've been saying that all along. Well, after there's a peace, we'll send troops. When in fact, they know good and well that the Russians have already said no. And to me, it's a way of saying we will not allow any kind of a settlement of this, any kind of a diplomatic settlement. Just simply saying we know the one thing the Russians will never accept in any kind of settlement. So we'll just keep repeating over and over. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. And we know then there will be no settlement. But what's interesting is this. When I look at Merz, when I look at Starmer or Macron, their legitimacy as leaders, their numbers, their approval numbers are so, the paucity of their approval numbers, of their support internally. It's interesting to see that this dynamic is so pervasive through Europe, that these leaders who have extremely low approval ratings are taking actions as though they have 90% approval ratings. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first point about Ukraine, there is not one European leader ready to go and see the European citizens dying, officially sending troops, dying for Ukraine. That was not the deal. Joe Biden, when he was during his mandate, and Europe agreed to go and sit in Ramstein, Germany. 50 nations were there to plan, conduct, and support Ukraine so Ukrainian can die on behalf of the American and maybe European interest. However, in Europe, there are no interest in fighting Russia for a simple reason. For the Americans, it is important that Europeans are involved because a war against Russia will keep Europe very dependent on America defense contract and agreement, and will maintain the bases, the military bases in Europe. People don't know that we have hundreds of military bases, US military bases in Europe, to defend Europe against who? We don't have enemies that are going to attack the continent. Why Europe? Why America needs bases in Europe? Why America needs to deploy more than 150 nuclear bombs in Europe? So if they want to fire against Russia, it is the easiest way to fire it is from Europe, so the Russian can bomb back Europe as a second hit. So for the Europeans, the deal was at the beginning to divide Russia and loot Russia because the continent prospered on looting other continents. Europe looted Africa, Latin America throughout centuries. And this is how Europe made its money. And now it is no longer possible to loot any continent or country, but Russia remained with such a large natural resources and decided to engage in a war where it was an opportunity to divide Russia into more than 120 mini states. That was the general idea here in Brussels. And the Americans forwarded this idea, and the Europeans, most of them, not all of them, bought it and accepted. Now, Russia has been engaged against Ukraine for since 2022, February 2022. So we are coming to the 4 years now of engagement and war, and Russia did not complete the occupation and the control of 4 provinces. We're talking about Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. So how it is possible to convince the European people that Russia is going to invade the rest of Europe? They're going to take all of Ukraine, is going to take Poland, is going to take Romania, Latvia, Czechia, is going to take Germany, reach France, walk into the Champs-Élysées. All that is so ridiculous that nobody believes it. But we had a president, Volodymyr Zelensky, in Ukraine, ready to sacrifice his people, his economy, only to join NATO and to join the European Union. Well, we end up impoverishing Ukraine with hundreds of billions of dollars and euros in debts. We have Ukraine that has lost 120 square kilometers, 120,000 square kilometers of its territory. We have Ukraine indebted for tens of years ahead. We have Ukraine giving all the natural rare mineral to the Americans, the wheat to the Americans to sell. So the main resources of Ukraine under the American control, and we have nothing. We stopped buying oil and gas from Russia. We used to take it at a discount of 30%. Now we buy the same oil, the same Russian oil. Listen to this absurdity. We buy the Russian oil of India 3 times more expensive than the price that we used to buy it. And now we have made a deal to buy liquefied gas from America 3 times more the gas that we used to take it in Russia. And we continue pumping money into Ukraine. The last one was 90 billion euros on 2 years. Zelensky received 45 billion this year, and he will receive another 45 billion this year. And if he fails to pay back the money, which he will because he doesn't have money, then it will be considered as a gift. And the countries who decided to give him this gift will bear the consequences. Well, the consequences on us are the increased cost of life, the diminishing of the power of the euro, and a total overwhelming insecurity in the continent of the future. People don't have money. People are afraid of spending money. People are spending more on food. Banks are no longer lending money for those who want to buy a property to live in. For new couples who want to start their life, they need to put a large sum before they start, which was not the case before. And now medical services are degraded. So this is where we are at today because we decided to support Ukraine, thinking that that was a good idea. So President Putin is not in a hurry. He sees how the Europeans are committing suicide and how the boomerang effect is hitting them hard on every decision they are making. And he really waiting until Europe would say it's enough. The problem is Europe is not going to say it's enough because it means Russia has defeated 50 nations gathered to defeat and stand against Russia and have failed to impose on Russia the condition. And now the race is who is going to impose which condition on the other. For Russia, it is not a question of territory, it's a question of security. Ukraine is not allowed to represent a threat against Russia, and the Europeans are not allowed to send troops, and Ukraine is not allowed to be part of NATO. So we are back to the 1990s verbal agreement between the Americans and the Russian, where Gorbachev was promised and Yeltsin after him that NATO is not going to expand. Instead, NATO has expanded, but it was stopped on Ukraine and Georgia.
The last thing I'll touch base with, we've got about 9 minutes left. So the last thing I'll touch base on you is this. In America, people were upset with the Biden administration for any number of reasons, not the least of which being the genocide, supporting genocide, but, overall warmongering, aggressive militaristic policies, and ignoring the needs of the constituents of the party, the population, the working class. Okay. Donald Trump ran and said, I'll do the opposite. Now he's got elected. He's ignoring all of that. He's doing what Joe Biden did. If you look at the parties in Germany, you go from what's his name to Merz. If you look at France, if someone else runs, they lock them up. If you look and by the way, Macron started a new party. A lot of people don't know. I think his party was somewhere between 11 and 18 months or something like that. It existed. It was supposed to be a new party. He comes in. If you look at Starmer, well, you go from the Tories to the Labor to the Labourers to Tories, whatever. In the West, I think the people are politically exhausted because every time they try a new party or a new party arises, they realize that the political class and the ruling elite has just come up with a new facade, a new charade, a new group of puppets. And they go to these puppets and they get the same thing. Your thoughts on the political exhaustion of the people and how that leads to, I don't want to use the word revolution, but something is coming politically, because once the people have no faith in the system anymore for obvious reasons, things become unpredictable. And at times, it historically says they can become violent. Your thoughts on that?
People in Europe are asking that the constitution is reconsidered, in particular for the blank votes during the elections. Because when people are faced with a choice, for example, you mentioned Emmanuel Macron a few times. In France, for example, people were faced with between Macron and Le Pen, the right wing. Well, nobody wants Macron, but they certainly don't want the right wing party to win. So they go for the less evil. And Macron say exactly these words. When he is elected, he said to the population, I know you did not elect me because you want me and you like me. He knows that because people don't have a choice. It's like in America, either a Democrat or a Republican. You don't have many choices. You have two people, two candidates reaching the end, and these two, one of them is going to be elected. So who would you elect? Either you put no vote, or you pick up which one is less damaging, or perhaps meeting with your ideas on common ground in some areas. Well, in Europe, it's exactly the same today. Nevertheless, there is another movement today among the population where they are fed up of the socialists, they are fed up of the non right wing, but those who are in the middle. And they say, well, why not give the right wing a possibility to show us what it's capable of? And then they vote right wing. because dossiers like immigration is very attractive, very sexy among the population, because leaders tell people that the reason why the cost of life is so elevated is because there are immigrants, but we don't have people, couples having children anymore. The continent is becoming older and older, and the young generation is not needed to populate the continent. It is needed to pay the pension to the old one who will go to pension, and they have contributed for 42 years working with their payment to get a pension at the end of their retirement. Well, there is a prediction today in Europe that people who have contributed thousands of euros every single year to the social security, to the retirement, will not get more than €1,000, equivalent to 1,000, less than $1,100 at the end in their retirement, when the value of money is going so low that with 1,100, no old couple can survive by paying their rent, and they pay taxes on their retirement. So you have to pay taxes on that, and then you have to pay rent, you have to pay the cost of life, you have to pay the difference of social security and medical support, all that with all the need of elderly people with $1,100. This is the level of concern among the population has reached this point where they no longer know what to do and who to vote for.
Thank you very much. Once again, let me show you EJ's fantastic website before we go. It's EJ, and you can see his the spelling of his name, EJMagnier.com, Middle East politics. And he's got a lot of great articles, Why Trump Violated International Law and Abducted Venezuela's President. These articles, you can see them in various languages, Iran, Trump Netanyahu talks, Iran's missile program. So the very important issues that you are concerned with, EJ has, as you can tell by the interview today, he has brilliant inside information. He has a tremendous amount of historical knowledge on these issues. He's been covering conflicts, political and military conflicts for decades. And EJ, I really thank you for coming on board with us and enlightening us on a lot of these issues today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Garland.
All right, everyone. Thank everyone. I want to thank you all who are my Patreon members or buy me a coffee, or those who choose to contribute to the channel. If you want to, I've got a PO box for those who use snail mail. Whatever you want to send me your manifest. I have people that basically send me their manifestos written out, or a card or whatever you want to send. I have, for those who use snail mail, there's a PO box there. And thank you very much. Look forward to getting you back on again, Elijah, and everyone. Thank you very much. The most important thing you can do when you watch these alternative media shows is share them. We don't have the big advertisements. We have no way of getting this stuff out there. But those of you who are in the chat, like, subscribe, and the most important thing, share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much.